Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Wachowski in for Bryce Zuskit, and thanks so much for joining us this week on Market Journal. We're changing up the pace a bit this week for the broadcast. We'll be taking a look back at some of our more popular stories from the last year. We'll also get an update on the markets with Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman and weather with Alan Detcher coming up later in the show. But first, with harvest right around the corner, it's always a great opportunity for a quick farm safety update. Every year, grain bins and power lines pose a serious risk to producers, their equipment, and the people around them. Coming up first today, let's go back to last harvest season. Market Journal producer Bill Dodd gives us a closer look at grain bin safety and also shares why the Nebraska Public Power District will encourage farmers to look up and look out.
Few things can be more catastrophic to a farming operation than an accident that leads to permanent injury or death. According to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, agriculture ranks among the most hazardous industries. Farmers are at very high risk for fatal and non-fatal injuries, and every day about 100 agricultural workers suffers a lost time work injury. According to research from Purdue University, in 2019 there were 38 documented cases of grain entrapment across the country. That is a nearly 27% increase of the 30 reported instances in 2018.
Normally they go in, they leave the unload system running, they stand in the middle of the bin because a chunk of out-of-condition grain has blocked the grain from flowing. They stand right in the middle of that bin with a rod and they jab down through the grain to bust up that chunk. And when it works, and when they hit that chunk of grain, the grain literally grabs them and starts pulling them right down with it.
Harvest can be an especially high-paced and frantic time for many producers. That's why many experts are now urging those same producers to take a second look and really pay attention to their surroundings as they perform seemingly everyday tasks, such as checking grain bins. One way to ensure your safety when checking grain bins and avoid grain entrapment is simply grain management and quality control.
To flat out avoid it, grain management is key. Make sure you keep that grain in good condition so you don't have the chunks. University extension agencies do trainings and offer a lot of material on this subject to make sure that grain is kept in condition. We always use the old adage that, if I've got a grain bin full of grain, that may be $200,000 worth of grain in there, maybe more, maybe $500,000 worth of grain in that bin. If I took that $500,000 or $250,000 and I put it in a bag in cash and hung it in that bin, they'd go out and check it every day to make sure it was still there. But they fill that bin with that much money value of grain, they may not check it but once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks. We've had guys we've talked to that I didn't check it for a month. So, there's a variation there, and they're not connecting the two with the value of and how often they need to be inspecting it and checking it. So the more often they check it and make sure the management and the maintenance, and nowadays there's a lot more automated controllers out there that can help protect your investment in that grain that's in that bin. So the quality of the grain is key.
Another step you can take to bolster the safety of grain system workers is to install a lifeline in the roof of a grain bin to ensure entrapment doesn't become full-blown engulfment.
When we're dealing with grain like that out of condition, there's lifelines now, and they're very economical to put in grain bins on a farm. These lifeline systems prevent a person from ever sinking more than waist deep in the grain. So the idea is simply we mount an anchor point and a pulley up at the top of the roof, and the farmer can rig he installs his lifeline. It takes about 10 seconds to run the rope up through and back, and then hook it on himself or whoever's going in the bin. And then we prefer to have a second person there to run the rope for him while he's in there working. That way they can get help if something happens. We can rig the lifeline so that the farmer controls it himself. But again, I always encourage them, make sure you've got a radio or a cell phone or something that when you're in that bin you can call for help, because if something does happen, even though you're only waist deep, you're still stuck and trapped and you're going to need help getting out. So if they're going to be working alone, we can facilitate that to keep them safe, but they just need to make sure they've got communication available to get help coming.
When checking bins, it's also encouraged to use a lockout-tagout system each and every time before entering bins or performing service or maintenance. Grain system workers should always assess what controls need to be locked out before any work is done.
The other thing is simply before you go into a bin, lock out, tag out. If they would lock out that auger before they go in, yeah, you may have to make 2 or 3 trips in and out until you get it flowing again, but that means you're going home at night. You're not going to die in that bin that day if you lock out that auger, or just, even for a farmer, if they don't lock it out, if they're the only one there, shut it off before you go in. I mean, that's better than nothing. If you leave it running, you've got a chance of not coming out.
On the subject of lockout tagout, electricity is a very large component to farming these days. This everyday facet of life is so commonplace that it may sometimes be taken for granted and can sometimes be overlooked as a costly or fatal hazard. However, a recent uptick in cases involving contact with farm equipment and electrical wires has caused the Nebraska Public District to take notice of this issue and has been encouraging ag producers to look up and look out. If you do encounter a scenario where your equipment makes contact with a live high-voltage wire, NPPD recommends that if you have a cell phone, you should remain in the cab and call 911 immediately. If it is absolutely necessary to exit the vehicle due to other hazards such as a fire, you'll want to jump completely away from the vehicle, ensuring that you never touch the ground in the vehicle at the same time, landing with your feet together. From there, you'll need to shuffle your feet, or hop with both feet together, 20 to 40 feet from the area. Once you've cleared the area, you should never try to return to the vehicle until the situation has been resolved by the local power authorities. Keeping these topics in mind over the course of the fall season will help you have a safe and successful harvest. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
If you'd like to learn more about safety tips from the Nebraska Public Power District or grain bin safety in general, we have posted some helpful links to the Market Journal website. On the topic of grain safety, looking at it a little bit closer, Purdue University reported this spring that there were at least 29 fatal and non-fatal grain entrapment cases documented in 2021. Those cases represented a decrease from the 35 recorded in 2020, and the running average of those has been steadily decreasing since its peak of over 40 cases reported in 2011. Now, while that number is declining, a pair of UNL graduates are looking to bring that number to zero. Market Journal's Mike Straub gives us a closer look at a machine called the Grain Weevil that aims to make sure no one ever has to set foot in a full grain bin again.
Grain bins may look safe from the outside, but if you've ever had to climb inside one, you know that they can pose a dangerous risk. In 2019, the Daily Yonder reported that grain entrapments rose 27%, with deaths rising by 53% the same year. Realizing that lives are at risk, 2 young Nebraskans formed a partnership which will help keep people out of grain bins altogether.
So actually we were approached by our farmer friend who saw us, kind of tinkering around with robots, and asked us one day, he said, I never want to climb into a grain bin again, and I have some kids that I know that one day might have to climb into a grain bin. I never want them to have to go through that. So I want you guys to build me a robot so that no one ever has to go through that process ever again.
The Grain Weevil robot is a grain bin safety and management robot. It scurries across the top of the grain using auger-based propulsion, and this allows us to manipulate the grain so we can break up clumps and bridges, level the bin, and help with the efficient extraction of the grain when you're taking it out.
The 2 recent engineering graduates designed the robot to be small and streamlined, ensuring it can move freely within the grain bins.
Our small 18-inch by 20-inch robot allows us to be mobile inside of the bin. Unlike other solutions, which are big, heavy, attached to every bin, expensive products, we're able to move from bin to bin. We're able to do more complex tasks, like breaking up specific clumps or fixing small areas inside of a bin.
So we started kind of with a lot of off-the-shelf devices. So we hit the ground running with that, and then slowly I've been transitioning over to our own proprietary software. So it's been about a year-long process to get that all shifted over.
So right now we're able to do temperature as well as ambient humidity. We're working towards some more grain quality measurements, but those are more complex, and so we'll be working through those this summer.
So right now we have a remote control that we just drive manually, but in the future we hope to have it be completely autonomous. The farmer only has to drop the robot into the bin and then just walk away and let it run.
Other future changes include more data sampling options as well as cameras, so farmers can keep an eye on what's happening inside the bin. Both Zane and Ben are optimistic about the Grain Weevil's future, as they can see technological changes happening within the industry.
We're pushing as fast as we can. We're really passionate to get this thing out there as quickly as possible to help the farmers.
So in the future, hopefully in the next 10 years, we see every farm as having some sort of grain bin management system on it, and we hope to be that system. So we hope that the Grain Weevil is on grain bins all across the United States and hopefully eventually internationally.
I think that grain bins and farming in general is becoming more tech advanced, and I think there's going to be a big push on the safety as well as the management side, because we can improve the storage process that we currently have. And I think that there's going to be tools that will help and aid the farmer in that process, and I think that we have something that can definitely help that process.
The Grain Weevil is going into testing at 5 farms across the nation. Ben and Zane hope that these tests can help fine-tune the robot to work faster and more efficiently in the future. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
Thanks for that, Mike. If you would like to learn more about this product and its development progress, you can learn more at grainweevil.com. Moving on, as promised, we're taking a closer look at the movement in the markets this week. On Wednesday, we were joined by Luke Beckman, Grain Sales Manager with Central Valley Ag. Luke, let's kick off this conversation heading overseas, looking at some energy concerns over in Europe. How is this shaking up the markets this week?
Well, Alex, the energy conversation is something that we talked about this winter as really being a key theme for our commodity markets over the course of 2022. And that kind of died down in June, July, as the markets retreated really for your energy products, crude oil, natural gas, et cetera. Things have really been reignited as of late. And if you look across the pond at Europe, the issues start right there. We have the issue ongoing in Eastern Europe with Ukraine and Russia is the key gas supplier to Europe. And as we approach winter, this should be a time where inventories are building and they're prepping for a cold winter, and they're sourcing fuel so that they'll have adequate supplies to heat homes and run their industrial economy the way they want to. And so that's been a problem. Russia continues to control the gas supply, and that's a lever in negotiations with the conflict going on in Ukraine. And so it's led to natural gas prices reaching all-time highs. Energy prices for residential and commercial usage in Europe are at all-time record levels. And so this has a spillover effect on our commodity space, no doubt. You've seen crude oil reverse course. It was, continuing to trend lower, and we've seen a little bit of a bid come back into the energy space this week. And so that underpins commodities as we look at what's going on with corn and soybeans in our space. As we ask the question, are the funds getting interested in commodities again? We saw them exit the space in late June, and that really took us from the $7 December, $15 November futures, and saw some deep corrections down into the 5s for corn and down into the 12s for soybeans. And so this week, you've kind of got the commodity story running again. You've got some hedge fund interest in commodities, and I think we have to look at energy as we really go into this new marketing year in terms of what's the potential going to be. So that's the big macro issue at play.
So that's a global concern. Another global concern right now, supply and demand. That's something that we're looking at domestically too. Let's start with global production. Conversations about lower corn in the EU and China. What's that doing to the markets?
Yeah, really 3 to 4 weeks ago, we really started to see production estimates for corn in the European Union, which isn't a huge global player, but it's all part of the pie. And you throw in the issues going on in Ukraine, and it all matters. And so you've had dry, hot weather in key portions of the European Union, and so their production estimates have come off a fair amount, 15 to 20% in the last 3 weeks. As that has intensified. And so that's part of your global corn carryout that's going to come away, and it's going to redirect some trade flows. Whether that comes from the U.S. or not remains to be seen, but it's lost production in any event. And then recently, here in the last few weeks, you've got kind of the same issues brewing in China. You've got some hotter and drier conditions there that potentially could be trimming into their crop. That's going to be a little bit more of a black box, really hard for us to know for sure what the production estimates look like in China, but that's something that we need to watch. And probably the third thing is just the U.S. crop. It seems like in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we haven't been finishing this crop real well. It's been hot, been dry in key places. And so we'll see, if that manifests itself in a lower yield estimate by the USDA here in early September. You've got a lot of your private tour yield tours going on this week. and they're finding maybe yields that are a little bit less than what the USDA reported in August. And so all of those things kind of converging this week to really create a new sense of bullish optimism in both corn and soybeans.
Luke, as you and I were chatting, we were talking about it is a little bit early to see those pre-harvest lows, but not the first time we've seen something like that. Tell us a little bit more about that aspect of the story.
Yeah, seasonally, Alex, we really don't see lows in corn, soybeans, your row crop markets until sometime in September is usually a pretty safe bet. That can drift into October as well. But usually right after Labor Day, we start to have those conversations. Corn found that 560 mark in early August. And so did we find a pre-harvest low in early August? I think that's the question. So it's certainly feasible. We'll see how the commodities, react from here. But if we did find a pre-harvest low, there's certainly a good case going on fundamentally and from the macro perspective to say that corn and soybeans are fairly well supported, although I'd say corn has probably a better story than soybeans.
So looking at the big picture, Luke, all of this is impacting our producers' risk management decisions. As you look at this week's trade, possibly this past week or this past month, what are some important things our producers need to keep their eyes on?
Well, I think as you look at old crop, if there's any producer sitting on any old crop inventories with the cash inverse that we have, it's wise to get rid of that crop. If you're still bullish, you can maintain ownership on paper. That's the wise thing to do. There's no carry going into next summer. You can dump that crop, get the cash for it, and re-own July futures or buy calls, if you want to maintain upside. There's no reason to carry physical corn into an inverse like this. On the new crop side of things, as we look at the charts, December corn 688 is a key retracement level. If you're looking for targets and need to continue to get some new crop sold, that's a great place to engage, if you're looking at new crop sales. And then I think 2023, we started off the conversation today talking about energy. And, there's some issues there, and it's going to cause some support in the fertilizer and the input space. We did read of a couple fertilizer plants shutting down in Eastern Europe this week. And as Europe goes, so goes, the rest of the fertilizer world. So you're going to have higher input prices for 23. We kind of know that. But if you can get some 23 inputs locked in, I think you need to look at 23 selling opportunities for both corn and soybeans to make sure that you're locking in a margin. Focus on the margin, don't focus on the prices as you think about 23. We're just in a really high input environment.
A big thanks to Luke, as always, for his time this week. Next week, we'll be joined by Heather Ramsey with the ARC Group. So if you have a question you'd like me to ask Heather, feel free to email us or get in touch on social media, and we'll pass those questions along. Moving on, it's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we are rounding out August. Hard to believe. What can we expect in the coming days?
Well, Alex, we did see a little bit of precipitation this week. Most of it was what we call ridge runners, basically going over top of the ridge and then coming down the east side of it. That really impacted more of northern and northeastern Nebraska, with less of an impact as you move toward the south. In fact, getting south the I-80 corridor, most locations didn't receive anything in the way of precipitation, particularly from central Nebraska all the way out through western Nebraska. Now, as we go through this weekend, we're going to be dealing with a trough that's going to move in across the northern plains, and depending on its path, we'll really determine whether we're going to get into an extended period in eastern Nebraska with precipitation, or whether that trough is going to strengthen over the Great Lakes like it has done pretty much for the last 2 months. I'm kind of going and leaning toward the second option, but I remind you that this forecast here is based on that second option. The first option is that the low will cut off and then drift down into the central plains, which would present eastern Nebraska with the better precipitation opportunities. So as we go to the upper air models, the first thing I'll draw your attention to is here's that upper air low. We've had a series of troughs moving through. In fact, we had one last night that moved through, and that will be the trend that will continue as we go through this weekend. And they see that high pressure system trying to basically get pushed toward the south as that trough moves over. So we'll deal with this thunderstorm activity moving through Iowa as we go through today, and then we'll see a reformation as we go through the evening hours as this low comes into western South Dakota. We'll see low pressure developing in northeastern portions of South Dakota. That should be able to lift some moisture up into the region, and we'll see another complex move through during the overnight hours into Sunday morning. Now this trough, as it goes toward the Great Lakes, this is where the things start to change. This model basically takes the Great Lakes and strengthens it. So we're going to get on the back side of this upper air low, and that's going to bring in some slightly cooler conditions probably during the middle part of the week, but it also means another storm complex has come through during the overnight hours into Monday morning, and then by Tuesday, the GFS model really builds this ridge up. So we're going to see a fairly warm trend starting to develop in western Nebraska once again. Eastern Nebraska is going to see a little bit more cold air infiltration. It'll be delayed slightly. Most of the precipitation basically stays to our south and to our east. On Wednesday, we start to see the ridge pushing just a little bit farther toward the east, so we're going to see temperatures return to the upper 80s in the east. We're looking at temperatures in the low to mid 90s across the west. In terms of precipitation, once again, most of it will remain to our south as long as this trough itself develops. As we go into the day on Thursday, we start to see this trough trying to expand westward. That will try to push a little bit of cooler air in next week as the ridge starts to take more of a pattern over the central and southern Rocky Mountains. Precipitation still remains well to our south, pretty much free, but there is a hint of some monsoon moisture trying to work its way in, and that will probably continue into Friday as we see another big trough moving into the Pacific Northwest. And once again, I suspect that that will move right across the northern plains also. So low pressure in eastern Montana will start to work on this moisture, and as we get into next week, and there's a very good possibility that some of that system will work its way across the northern plains and give us some moisture for the Labor Day weekend. We look even farther out in the future, the 8 to 14-day forecast next Tuesday for the following Tuesday. We still see some of that cooler air in condition in the south of us. Warmer conditions out west as that ridge starts to really build in. And in terms of precipitation, right now precipitation is indicated to be blowing over across the northern plains above normal to our south. We're kind of caught in between, so depending on how deep that trough digs will determine how much moisture we actually get.
All right, thanks, Al. Well, these days, nearly 400,000 bison roam in the United States, and about 20,000 of those are located right here in Nebraska. Last month, our team had the opportunity to go visit a local ranch here in Nebraska that raises bison for consumption. Let's go back to Market Journal's Bill Dodd, who brings us more on this story.
In rural Lancaster County, a group of bison graze the grass at Miller Bison. The farm in Nebraska is one of the locations where the family operation raises bison for meat, and it all started more than 20 years ago.
We got our first bison in 1995. My dad brought some home from the Custer sale at that time, and I've been around bison my whole life. That was when I was in high school, and grew to like the animal. It's different. Family's been involved in cattle for many generations, and the bison was something different, and it just naturally grew in the family and with us liking the animal.
For their diet, BJ says bison can be fed very similarly to cattle.
Most of our stuff is on grass for the vast majority of its life. Like these guys will be on grass their whole lives. That's the purpose of them here with the cow-calf herd. But they're similar to cattle in their feeding and body types, that they're fed very similar things.
While they may be similar in some ways, there are some major differences. Most notably, their size.
There are some major differences, being mostly they're wild animals. Some of the things that come along with bison that can be detrimental to starting a bison herd is the facilities, the size of the fences, the loadouts and things like that. Just dealing with this animal, being as they are still a wild animal, can be definitely more difficult, but something that once you have the facilities and stuff that we do pretty well with.
Another difference, the rate of gain. BJ says it can take up to 3 years for bison to be ready to process.
And they're slower as far as gains. When you're feeding them, trying to turn them into a finished product, a lot of times it takes close to 3 years to feed an animal. The length of time to get them to the finish, they don't gain very fast, and the time involved to keep that animal healthy, happy, and going until he can be processed. Even to have a first baby is always generally a 3-year deal.
Once the bison reach a finished weight, some of those animals are processed and sold under the brand Nebraska Bison. BJ's sister, Megan Olesiak, manages that operation.
So Nebraska Bison is a family-owned company that sells bison, elk, and grass-fed beef online. We're pretty much strictly e-commerce, and we raise the bison and ship straight to your doorstep.
Megan says that the bison are processed at a USDA-inspected facility in Colorado, then shipped to a customer's doorstep.
So our top-selling product on NebraskaBison.com is bison, of course. We have a very large selection of cuts, steaks, sausages, summer sausage, all the prime cuts, burger, of course, jerky. And then we also sell 100% organic grass-fed beef, as well as some elk products as well. We recently added some dog bones, bison dog bones also, and we're kind of expanding that market into dog treats and a few things like that.
Megan tells me that their customers choose bison for two primary reasons: the health benefits and the taste.
People just, are referred from their doctors, the health benefits. It's basically bison meat compares most directly to skinless chicken breast in health benefits. So you just can't beat it. Plus you have the rich flavor, and of course, shopping local and ranch raised and that sort of thing is typically on the top of most consumers' lists as well.
Back to the production side of business, BJ says Nebraska is a natural home for bison.
Growing bison in Nebraska, I think it's a great place to grow bison in Nebraska. It's right in the middle of what would have been their natural habitat and range. The weather's great for it, the grasses are good, everything works well in Nebraska for it.
When you're firing up the barbecue over the remainder of the summer months, beef, pork, and chicken may be at the forefront of most grill masters' minds. However, bison may be something you're curious to try, and if that is the case, it never hurts to buy from a trusted local source like this. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
All right, thanks again, Bill. If you would like to learn more or order any of their products offered by Nebraska Bison, all you need to do is follow them online. Their website is nebraskabison.com. That is going to do it for this week's show. If you happen to miss a story, be sure to subscribe to Market Journal on YouTube and like and follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Hope to see you right here next week. Until then, I'm Alex Wojcicki wishing you a safe and productive week. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.